Plus of our learning, we should have the Beis Hamikdash for Shlema for everyone. Today we're going to start Yud Gimel Amud Beis Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish. Where is that? It's about 12 lines from the top. We got into Shumas and Maestras because we had a discussion if on Yom Tov you're allowed to actually bring the gifts to the Kohen. That's so we started to get into this a little bit. So Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish Meiser Rishon Sheklimu B'Shibalim Patim Truma Gedayla. Truma Gedayla is the first gift. It's 2%. 1 out of 50. Actually, the word Truma is Trey Mimeya. So it's 2 out of 100. Now, that's the first gift that's given to the Kohen. Then there's Meiser Rishon, which is given to the Levi. So the Levi gets 10% after the 2% is missing. Then the Levi then takes 1/10 of what he got and he gives that to the Kohen, which is 1/10 of 1/10. Minus, but all of that is measured after the 2%. The first 2% is gone. Yeah, you got to work that out, whatever it is.
The Rebbe says to
give Meiser? Yeah.
That's what I heard yesterday.
You should give anyway.
Yeah, but 10 to the 10.
Oh, really? Is that what it says? 1/10 of 1/10? Okay.
The Rebbe says.
So here what happened was the Levi shows up, he gets his Meiser, but the owner of the field did not give his Truma yet. Now there was nothing wrong with that because it wasn't Chayiv in Truma. The Chayiv of Truma is only after it's put into the silo and smoothed off on the top because they would put a lid on it or whatever. But they would smooth off the top because it would come into a pile. It's called Miruach. But the Levi came to get his Meiser when the grain was still in the stalks. It's Hikdimu b'shibalim. So there was never a Chiyav Truma. So what happens now? Now the Levi's grain that his Meiser was never Trumad. He's going to give Trumas Meiser, which is, I'm sorry. They didn't take off the first part, right? So he came early. As the second person supposed to comes before the first one. So okay. So what happens now? So the Gemara tells us interesting. Reb Shimon ben Lakish says, "Patim Truma Gedayla." He doesn't need to take Truma Gedayla from this Meiser. No, Truma Gedayla was never taken.
So it's not a retroactive application.
There's no chiyuv. The chiyuv is gone.
The owner's still.
The owner has a whole field that's chayiv, but this 10% doesn't need to lose the 2%, right? So, and what's the pshat over here? We have a pasuk shenema varimeisim imenu trumas Hashem meisim min meiser, that the Levi will remove the truma meiser min meiser, 1/10 of his 10th. Meiser min meiser marti lach v'lei truma gedayla trumas meiser min meiser. I only told you to take Meiser Mina Meiser, but not Truma Gedayla. Utrumas Meiser Mina Meiser. What's that extra? Trumas Meiser. Meiser Mina Meiser Martilach. The light Truma Gedayla Utrumas Meiser. And not both. That's what it means. You have to take only the Trumas Meiser Mina Meiser, but not the Truma Gedayla together with it. Okay, so I have a pasuk that exempts him from going back and doing it. Amalei Rav Papa la Abaya. Rav Papa is a student of Abaya. Says Yihachi, if that's the case, I feel like Dima Bekrinami. Rish Lakish only said this when there was never a chiyuv of Truma Gedayla because the Levi came before the chiyuv took place. He came while it was still in the stalks. So Rav Papa says to Abaya, let's say the Levi doesn't come that early. Let's say the Levi comes after the chiyuv already took place, but the owner never got his act together to actually separate the truma. The Levi shows up right then. Now the chiyuv of truma was there, but the Levi says, 1 second, let me take the meiser first. Does the Levi then have to take the truma off it? And the answer is yes. The problem is we have a pasuk that says no. Amalei Alecha Makra. I have another pasuk. Abaya responds to Rav Papa. It says Mikol Master Seichem or Mikol Matnei Seichem. There's two versions here. Terimas Kol Trumas Hashem. From all your gifts, you have to take off the truma. So even though it's becoming meiser before the truma was taken, you still have to take the truma. The Gemara says, why over here, when you came after the chiyuv, do you have to take the truma? And why, when you came before the chiyuv, do you not have to take the truma? So the Gemara answers, "Ha yidgen v'ha yidgen." Well, this one went into the granary, and this one didn't. Taisus asks, "What was the hapamina?" That's such an obvious answer. So what was the Gemara even asking? This one never had a chiyuv, so you're exempt, and this one does have a chiyuv. Okay. Yeah, we'll leave the answer. Okay. Tanan Hassam, sort of over there in the Mishnah in Maestros. Hamakalef Sa'irim. If someone is peeling barley, I didn't know you could do this, but apparently you could eat the barley raw.
Try it.
Yeah. Apparently. Okay. So the problem is that you're not taking the meiser, but the only thing is you're eating it raw as a snack. So we said that if it was never really chayiv and meiser, because you didn't bring it into the house in whatever manner. So as long as you don't eat it in a permanent fashion, you're exempt from meiser. So yeah, when I went to Eretz Yisrael, so I went with a friend that is into agriculture. He has farms in Peru or whatever. Anyway, so he wanted to go see all the vineyards. I was busy with whatever, and he went with his farmer friends. They drove him around. And we came back at night. We met at the hotel. So he had grapes with him that he had brought. So I don't know the halachas of Eretz Yisrael well, but he said the farmer, there's a from guy that told me I should eat the grapes. I wasn't sure. You eat the grapes in the field without shumas and maestros. That's fine. I don't know what happens when you take them home. I don't know. It could be the halachas that now I have to take.
You're lazy.
Anyway, it gets complicated. So here, Mekalif Sarim, you're taking the peel off the barley. So it says Mekalif Achas Veichel. You can take it as a snack. You take one at a time. You peel it, you eat it. You peel it, you eat it. That's how people eat snacks. But if you peel all of them and you put it into your hand, then that's already chayiv. Then that's already a different way. It's like the way the sunflower seeds. You don't peel them all. You do one at a time. You do one at a time. That's the snacking way. But if you do them all together and then you're gonna eat, that's already like a meal, and that's different. Amar Rabbi Lazar, b'chein l'Shabbos. Rabbi Lazar says the same halacha that you're telling me about the obligation of meiser is also going to tell me what's considered mefarik or dash. Dash is threshing, removing the inside from the husk, the kernel from the husk, which is a malach on Shabbos. If you do one at a time, then that's considered kalacher yad. It's not considered a real malacha. So that's potter, I guess. But if you do it a whole handful, then that's considered regular dash, and that's going to be chayiv. So, Eini, is that so? V'Rav mekalfalu de bisu kasi kasi. Reb Chia mekalfalu de bisu kasi kasi. Rav and Reb Chia was Rav's uncle, his father's brother, actually his mother's brother as well. Yeah, a very interesting relationship there. But whatever the case is, both of them, their wives would peel. They both had difficulty with their wives. Remember Rav's student, Rav's son said, "Why are you still married to her?" Anyway, she peeled the barley and gave it to him, apparently on Shabbos, in a cup. So why are you telling me it's usher? Seems like it's mutter. If you're going to say the statement of Rabbi Elazar, That's Rebbe Elazar was in the Mishnah. That's a Rebbe Elazar in the Mishnah is Rebbe Elazar ben Shemua. It's that other student of Rabbi Akiva, the fifth student of Rabbi Akiva. So if we're going to say his statement, we're going to have to say it at the end, which goes like this. No, it can't be Rebbe Elazar from the Mishnah. It must be a statement of the Amoira Rebbe Elazar on the Mishnah, but that's what would be Rebbe Elazar ben Padas because it's called a Idmar, right? It was stated on the end. It says like this: Amoilel Malila is. Remember, we said you're rolling the grains. Shalchitim, you're taking it out of the shell. So menafeach al yad va'eichal. How do you get rid of the chaff? So you blow it as you pass it from one hand to another. Is chayiv. But if you blow it and you're putting it into your lap, then you're chayiv. Now, very interesting Rashi. Rashi says the edge of his garments, shakairin, pants. Yeah, there's an English word there. Okay, it's Old French. Pants in Old French must mean like the edge of the garment. So, what's going to happen now? We're talking about eating. Oh, I said what we're doing here is we're discussing meiser. So you can eat it without meiser if you're just taking it from one hand to another. We say al yad meant that it was a small amount. I relearned that yesterday. Yeah, al yad doesn't mean from one hand to the other. Miyad liyad means from one hand to passing, but al yad means it's just a small amount. Al yad meant a small amount yesterday. So let's learn like that. That if you're just eating a small amount and you're blowing a small amount off, so then that's good. But if you're blowing and putting it into your lap, it's going to be a large amount. Then it's chayiv in meiser. And on that, Amar Rabbi Elazar v'chein l'Shabbos, and then that's going to be considered zoyra, or separating the chaff for Shabbos as well. Maskavla Rababa Bar Mamel. Rababa Bar Mamel has a question. The Reisha, what you said before, peeling the grains, peeling the barley. L'maiser in l'Shabbos life. You're telling me that it's only an issue of meiser and it's not an issue on Shabbos to as dash, taking the inside out of the outside. If it's not considered dash is threshing, it's not considered taking the grains out for Shabbos, and why is it considered taking the grains out for the end of the process for Meiser? Maskefler of Sheshes Preder Ravidi Beloy. We don't have that. It's in like ask questions on questions, which means an answer. It's not a problem. It's not we don't have a difference. V'garnan lemaiser. But when it becomes a granary, that's when it becomes chayiv in meiser. Well, that would be truma. But it means if you pile it up, the gemar malacha, and that's not a problem of Shabbos. Why? The Tanan ezo garnan lemaiser. What's considered the finished product for meiser? Hakishu and vadiluan, which is squash and gourds. Mishiyif kasu. When you cut the tops off, apparently there's like a little flower at the edge, at the end of it, which would fall off on its own. But if you cut that off, then that's considered like it's ready to be sold or eaten or whatever. B'shaloi paksu. But if you didn't cut it off, mishiyamid arema. When you make it into a pile. Utanan namigabi bitzalim, and it was said about onions. Mishiyamid arema. When you pile it up into a pile, when you pile it up, that's when it's chayav in meiser. V'ila gabi Shabbos, amadas arema potter. But on Shabbos, I'm allowed to make a pile of onions. Not in the field. In the field, you have problems of collecting things together. But in the house, you can make a pile, and there's no problem. It's not considered that you're a malacha. So in other words, what we're saying is that something that would make it chayav in meiser, because it's the conclusion of the process of preparing this to become edible, to become the finished product, is not a problem on Shabbos. So what do you want to say? Melachas machshavas asr Torah. When it comes to Shabbos, it needs to be over here it says Melachas machshavas. It doesn't mean like an intent in an intention where it means a what was the word that he used? Calculated. Is that the word? It says a craftsmanship. So that's going to be a problem. Achanami, so also by peeling these barley, Melechas machshavas asr Torah, it's only going to be asr on Shabbos if it would have been a craftsmanship. But over here, it's just taking it's not considered a real malacha, taking it out of the husk. Okay. Professional. That's right. Okay. Ketzad Milo. How do you? Yeah. What's wrong? What is that? Oh. The ears. How do you remove the grains? How do you remove the grains from the husk on Yom Tov? Abaya Mishmeider Rav Yosef Amar Chada Chada. You take your thumb and you push it against one finger. All right. That was Abaya in the name of his teacher, Rav Yosef. Rav Avya Mishmeider Rav Yosef Amar Chada Tarti. Rav Avya, also apparently a student of Rav Yosef, says that you can do the thumb against two fingers. Rava Amar Kivan de Mishani Afilu Chada Kulanami. Once you're making a difference, why is this considered a difference? I guess because you're doing a small amount. Then you can do all the fingers. You can rub your thumb against all the fingers. Ketzad minafeyach. How do you blow the chaff away? Amar Rav Ada Barava Amar Rav. Rav Ada Barava says the name of Rav. Minafeyach mikishri espaisav ulamayla. Yeah, kishri espaisav is the joints that attach the fingers to the palm. You can't blow out of the palm, but you can blow from the top of the fingers, which would be a little bit different. We're trying to make a shina here. Machkolab Marava, they laughed about this. Given the Mishani, once you're doing something different, which you are doing it different because you're doing it by hand, you're not using a utensil. You can blow it out, the chaff out from the whole hand. He says that you can blow it out from your hand if it's in one hand, and you can blow with all your strength. Okay. We have a new Mishnah. What we're discussing now is malachas that could be done before Yom Tov. Should not be done on Yom Tov. But certain things are better if they're done on that day. So spices have more of a flavor if they're fresh. So Bishamai says you can use a madach shel eitz. Madach is a pestle, mortar and pestle. It doesn't need a shinoi. Why? Because it's eichel nefesh. It's for food. Yom Tov you're allowed to prepare food, and it's tavlan, spices which you want to have the strongest flavor. So you're allowed to do it on Yom Tov. However, v'hamelach, but when it comes to salt, they used to have to crush the salt. So that the salt is the same if it was yesterday or today. So that needs a shinoi. So you could use a pach, which was an earthenware jug, beitza parar, or with a big spoon. Yeah, you need a shinoi according to Beishamai. Yisrael tavlin niduchen kedarken b'madach shaleven. Yisrael says tavlin, you can actually use an actual grinder, which is made out of stone. That could be used for like larger amounts, I think. But yeah, it's I don't know if it's larger amounts, but it's not a shinoi at all. You see, the madach shel eitz is a small shinoi. So a adjust in Rashi. Eina ela shina zuta. I don't know if you see that adjustment. Normally it's made out of stone, so you're doing it mamish in the regular way. And vahamelach b'madach shalit. Beis says salt doesn't need a shina. Shina means you do it a little differently, so it's noticeable that it's yomtiv. But it doesn't need to be a big difference. It could be a small difference. Also, a metal. You go from stone grinder to a wooden grinder is also a difference.
Is this the source for all these malachos that we have?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is the big sugya. This is it.
What's the reason salt needs machinery?
Salt needs a shina because salt has the same flavor if you would have ground it yesterday.
So it's not because the spices are organic and salt is
No.
inorganic.
No.
Well, maybe that's why
Although that is a good. That
maybe
is a
that's
good.
why.
I hear you. Very
You really
interesting.
can't change salt. It's NaCl no matter what size you make.
Yeah, I had Al-Khanan at my house.
This is for you,
Al-Khanan said he had Himalayan salt. It said on it, it's some millions of years old. And then he looks at the expiration date. Says it expires in a year. He says, "My luck, 2 million years it's around. Right when I get it, it's gonna expire." Okay, so the Kuli Alma Mias Melach by Shinai. Everyone agrees that salt doesn't need a Shinai. My time. Why does salt need a shina? A shina means you have to do it a little differently. Rav Huna v'Rav Chisda. It's a discussion between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda, two opinions. And when it does this, it doesn't tell us who holds what. One opinion is you knew you needed salt. You know you're gonna cook. So why didn't you grind the salt? Spices, you say the next day, I didn't know I was going to make gefilte fish, so I was going to use that spice. I thought I was going to make whatever, Moroccan fish. Thought I was going to use just the peppers. I don't know what. So I didn't have like that in my plan. But salt, every dish needs salt. So you should have known. That's one shot. So therefore, you should have ground it yesterday. Chadamar, the other one says, Kol tabla mafikin taima. The other opinion was that all spices, they lose their flavor as time goes on. Melach ain't a timer, but the salt doesn't lose its flavor. So you should have done it yesterday. Both of them are basically saying you should have done it yesterday. The question is like, because of what? Either because you should have known or because the flavor is the same. My binayu, what's the difference between these two reasons? The other my kadera boy. Let's say he knew what he was going to make tomorrow. He made his menu. So if you knew what he was going to make, then you should have ground the spices according to the opinion that says that salt you knew how much you were going to need, but spices you didn't know which dish. Well, here you didn't know which dish. You should have ground the spices yesterday. Inami b'murika. Yeah, murika must be a type of dish that has a spice that doesn't saffron that doesn't lose its flavor. Is that true? Is that our saffron? Is that it's supposed to be very expensive, but I never. But does it not lose its flavor?
Oh boy! You're trying.
You wouldn't know that was bad.
That's
Okay.
bad. They just don't get it.
They don't get it. It's like, thank God you're so clean you don't get it.
Amar Rav Yida Amar Shmuel. Rav Yida, supposed to do some small sin before Yom Kippur. Just one.
Yeah,
That was
she did.
very small. It was
Okay.
also very long time.
Okay.
Okay.
Amar Rav Yida Amar Shmuel. Rav Yida says in the name of his teacher Shmuel, the second teacher. His first was Rav. Kol niduchen kedarka and vafilu melach. Everything that's ground or crushed rather is crushed normally in even salt. Whoa, really? Goes against everything that we just learned. Salt needs a to do it in a different manner. So the Gemara explains with Amar Ki Aitana. There's actually another brisa that teaches this Mishnah that we have that teaches the same machlekes Beisil Beishamai, but it teaches it different. The Tanya was started in the brisa Amar Reb Meir. Reb Meir's opinion is that Loi Nechleku Beishamai Beisil al Niduchen Sheniduchen Kedark and Melech Iman. There's no machlekes Beisil and Beishamai regarding crushing spices, and included in that is salt. To crush the salt together with the spices is fine, regular at one go. The problem is to crush the salt separate from the spices independently. There's actually two differences. We're adding in one more detail over here. The amount of salt that's used when you roast is much less than the amount of salt that you use when you prepare it for cooking. When you roast, you don't really need salt, right? They sprinkle a little bit on the salt to get rid of they sprinkle a little salt on the meat to get rid of when they're roasting it to get rid of the blood. But when you're salting it because you're going to put it in a pot, for that you have to salt the whole thing heavily. So it's, what he's saying is litzli, that if you're crushing the salt independent from the spices, you can only do a little bit, let's say, for roasting. That amount. Basil says you can use anything to crush the salt. The Gemara is a little surprised about this. You can use anything. What about the halachas of muktzah?
Yeah.
It says Elaima lichol davar. We don't mean that you can use anything, but it meant that you can crush any amount, even if you're using it to salt kedera for cooking, where you need a lot of salt. You can do that as well. Amar, there's two versions over here. Amar le Ravacha Bardla Lebrei. The Bach Skir says Amar le Rav le Ravacha Bardla. Whatever the case is, one Amira is telling the other. Ki daiches atzli, when you're crushing salt for roasting, which is just a little bit of salt, atzli yeveduch, you should put the grinder on the side, so you should make a shina. Again, the grinder was the pestle and the mortar, so you can do it sideways as well. Rav Sheshes Shama Kol Buchna. Rav Sheshes hears the sound of the grinder. Amar Hailav Migavi de Besi, that can't be coming from my house. I don't allow it. No one's doing it in my house. The Gemara says 1 second. Maybe it was someone was doing it on the side. It says the Shama David Kol. He heard that it was being done. He just hears it, but he hears that it's being done normally. He hears the pounding. It says it.
Different.
If it would have been on the side, he would have heard the different sound. It says Vidil Matavlin Havli. How does he know it's not coming from his house? Because there's grinding going on. So what? Maybe it's spices, which that's totally mutter. Gemara answers, Tavlin Nevuchim and Aveach Kalayo. Spices, the sound of the spice grinding is different than the sound of salt grinding. The spice grinding barks. That means it makes a different sound. The Hebrew term that he uses, it barks, whatever it means. Okay, Tanar Rabbanan, start in the Braise, nice and tisni. Ve'in kaichin b'machteshes. Yeah, the certain grains, they cut them into different amounts of layers. Like the oats, I think, are sliced into several layers. So tisni happens to be the slicing of the grain into 4 parts. They were very into this. At least we had a Gemara Brachos where you had 5 different types of cutting grains apart. You had into 1 part, into 2 parts, into 3 parts, into 4 parts, into 5 parts. Different types of doing this. So it says that on Yom Tov you can't do tisni because it takes a lot of effort and it's too much tircha for Yom Tov, too much of a bother. And also the next thing is that you can't use a grinder. how do they translate a machteshes? Say, in koichin b'machteshes. A mortar. You can't use the mortar. Okay.
He said, we
Even like a mortar and
A
pestle,
mortar,
or
yeah. But the person with a lisp said,
I was a recipient also.
What does that mean?
because he said, "Ein the machteret."
Oh,
three for three.
Terrace
so the Gemara says, Tarti,
You don't-
are you telling me two separate halachas?
Um,
Because what's happened is like this. Your first halacha was that you can't grind it into four pieces. You can't crush it into four. Each grain would go into four pieces. That sounds like to cut it into two or three would not be a problem. But then you tell me that you can't use a mortar, which tells me that you can't do it into two or three either. So those two statements don't really fit together. So the Gemara says hachikama. What he means to say is matam inosin tisni. Why are you not allowed to matam? Please,
we just started to give him a lemon base.
Yeah.
By the two that's in the middle.
by Rish Lakish. What's the reason why you're not allowed to make the tisni? Why can't you make the grain into four parts? Because you're not allowed to use a mortar. So the Gemara says, what do you have to discuss? The tisni, which is the grain into four pieces. You're not allowed to use the mortar. Then you can't use the mortar. Forget the Gemara says, itani in kaitim b'machteshes. If it would just say that you can't use a mortar, havamina machteshes kedayla. I would have thought what it meant is you can't use a large mortar, a large grinder. A machteshes ketana, but if it would have been a small grinder, a mashaper dummy, I would say that you're allowed to use a small grinder. And the problem with that is, in a small grinder, I may also make tisni, which is the complicated and a lot of effort to make. And that we don't want you to do. So Kamash Malan, both of them, that I can't use anything to make tisni. And I can't, and when it says machteshes, that means I can't use a large one or a small one. Okay. The Gemara says, 1 second. Exactly what you tried to teach me, we have a brisa that says the opposite. It says that you're not allowed to use a large mortar, but you are allowed to use a small mortar. Amar Abaya. Abaya says, Kitanya nami masnisa machteshes kedei latanya. You want to know what the truth is? That when we said that you can't use a machteshes, it's really only a large one. And it's actually two separate things that's being taught here. You're not allowed to make tisni, is what Abaya is saying. Even in a small grinder, small mortar. And I'm not allowed to make those other types of crushed grains in a large one. Two separate halachas. Tisni, never. And encourage machteshes in a large one. That's how Abaya learns it. Rava says, like kasha. It's also not a question, but Rava does it differently. Halon v'halahu. He says that it's actually telling me like this. According to certain versions, according to in Eretz Yisrael, you're not allowed to use a small grinder because they had servants there. Yeah. They had servants that would use large grinders, and they would say that they did it in a small grinder. So they were like dishonest, and they weren't careful with the laws of Yom Tov. But by us, that we don't have servants, he's talking about in Bavel. So we have no problem with using a small grinder because we don't have people that are going to use the large one, claiming that they use the small one. So in Eretz Yisrael, they asked it even the small ones, the small grinders, because people were using the large ones, saying that they used the small one. Rav Papi Ikla Lebei Mar Shmuel. Rav Papi came to the house of Mar Shmuel. Mar Shmuel is not Shmuel. Shmuel. Yeah.
And
Marsh.
nothing to do with copies.
And Mar Shmuel is not Shmuel. It's not the Amir Shmuel. It's a later generation, I think, in the time of Rava. Aisalu daisa v'layachal. Anyway, they brought him daisa, which is a type of porridge, crushed grain, like farina or something, and he didn't eat it.
Still call it that.
Oh, in Eretz Yisrael it's called daisa. He doesn't want to eat it. Why? It was ground on Yom Tov. But maybe they used a small grinder, and what's the problem? The Chazid David Daik saw that it was very fine. So if that it must have been the large grinder that does it very well. How do you know it was today? Maybe they ground it yesterday. The Chazid David Kalif Tzir Tzahare. He saw that it was the outside, I guess, was shining. Must mean that it was ground today. So B'iba Yasema, another pshat is Shani Beimar Shmuel de Kapitzutz Davdi. Another issue is that he knew that the servants of Mar Shmuel were actually not careful with the halachas, and that's why he didn't want to eat it. Okay.
Since grinding can be done on Shabbos,
On Yom Tov.
why can't herbs be crushed to make medicine in the same way for the sheen?
Oh wow.
Great
Take a
question.
rest of the day off, sir.
Then you could take this.
Come to my house, I'll make medicine for you.
Well, no, just a long walk.
Wait, is grinding the
Don't-
right
don't-
or
Don't wait for the water. Don't wait for
No,
Reb Naftali has a question.
Natalia, the truth is the question could be
If
even deeper because
Grinding
medicine
has a
is
permissible,
asas nefashis is deiche.
if grinding has a permissible way of being done on Yom Tov, so is there a problem of medicine on Yom Tov? Because medicine was
The
always done
question is,
grinding.
is it considered echel nefesh?
It's a very good question.
Very good
But the
question.
same thing can be used for medicine or for food.
Don't spend all your trophies on
No,
one
no,
place.
this is worth it. This
I
is worth it.
want one.
I have to look. I would look in that tomorrow.
That one's for Donnie.
Sir, this is impressive.
Okay, we're up to the Mishnah.
I'm gonna send him a picture. He's gonna cry.
The Mishnah says, "Habayra kitnius b'Yom Tov." Separating legumes, beans on Yom Tov. What happens is there's the inside bean, and then there's all the peels and all of that. Bishama Yaimrim, Bishama says, "Bayrer eichel va'eichel." You take out the food and you eat it. Beisil Yaimrim, Bayrer kedarke b'cheikai, and b'knoin or b'tamchai. You can even use these instruments. Basically, Beisil says that you can do this normally. But you can't use those larger instruments that would be a sifter and a sieve and those larger instruments that were used, tools to separate, because you're not doing it. You're only supposed to be doing it for Yom Tov, not for large amounts. Rama Gamliel adds in. He says you're actually allowed to put water in it, and then the chaff floats to the top, and you take the chaff off. Right? Did we do Hilchos Shabbos? Did we do Masechta Shabbos when you were in my class, or did we do brachos? Do you remember? Did we do weaving? No, we didn't do weaving. So in one of my classes, we did the Malachas of Shabbos. So wanted to show them about winnowing. We got a bag of peanuts. You crush it, and then you turn on the fan, and you put it like in a tablecloth. You throw it up, and everything blows away. Yeah, it's not a big deal. But and then what falls back down, you have to separate because there's sometimes pieces that are still left. So here we're talking about separating on Yom Tov. Bishami says you can only do really exactly what you do, what your bayrer eichel va'eichel. You separate, you take the food out, and then you eat that food. The Basil says you can do it normally, and Rabbi Gamliel says you can even put water in and let it separate like that. Tanya was taught in by some Amar Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel says, it's another version, it's Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. When do we say this? That Basil says that you're allowed to take out the bad from the good. Beishami said you can take the good from the bad. Basil says you can even take the bad from the good. When do we say that? That's because the psilus is just a little bit. You know, on Yom Tov, you have another issue. You're not allowed to do anything that's a big tircha, or that's a big effort, exertion. You're not supposed to do that. So if Bayer, according to Basil, is mutter, but you should only do Bayer taking the bad from the good if the bad is less than the good, because then that's less tircha. But if there's more bad than good, then then Basil would agree with Beishamai that you need to take out the good. Is everyone familiar with the laws of Bayer? It works like this.
If you took the rabbi's money,
Yeah, it's nice of Javier.
There's three rules. There's three rules of Bayer. There's three rules.
I choose one to go.
One is that it has to be miyad for immediate use. You can't do it for later on. Yeah, and let's say you have a bowl of things that are mixed together. I don't know. Blueberries. Some of them are not good or something. You know, so you want to take them out. So first it has to be for right now because you're gonna eat. Second one is it has to be biyad. The first one is miyad, immediate. The second one needs to be done by hand. Can't use any instrument that would let it, separate. And then the third one is that I have to take the good from the bad. So if there's just a few in there that are bad, I have to take all the good ones out and leave the bad ones there. So Basil says not on Yom Tov. On Yom Tov you could take the bad from the good. So comes along Rav Shimon ben Gamliel and says, when Basil allows you to take the bad from the good, only when there's so much good, we want you on Yom Tov to do less work. So you take the bad, which is much less. However, if there was more bad than good, then Basil would agree that you have to take the good out because we want you to do less work. The Gemara asks, if there's so much bad in there, then the whole thing should be muktzah. Why should you really be allowed to do anything with this if it's all basically bad and it's just one good? It says, the nafesh b'tircha v'zitza b'shira. Shimon ben Gamliel was saying, not that there's so much bad that good rebuttal to it. Not that this in size. What it means is an effort. An effort in order to take the bad out would be a lot of effort. Sometimes it's very small, and it's hard to get to or something. So if it's easier to take the good from the bad, then you have to take the good from the bad, even if there's more. Doesn't matter how much there is. That's what we're saying. You have to do whichever one is easier. Gamliel says that you can put water in and let it raise to the top. Tanya Rabbi Beitza Daf shall base Rabbi Gamliel. That was the custom of base Rabbi Gamliel, the house of Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Beitza. Rabbi Beitza is the son of Rabbi Tzadok that fasted. Remember Vespasian asked for three things. Rabbi Yochanan Zaka asked Vespasian. The doctors for Rabbi Tzadok, the house of Rabbi Gamliel, the house of the Nasi. So here you have them here. They would bring a bucket full of lentils or something, and they would put water in it. The lentils would go to the bottom, and the chaff would go to the top. Gemara says, "V'atan yipcha." You have another brayso that says the other way, that the food went to the top, and the chaff went to the bottom. Oh yeah. So the Gemara says, "Like kasha haba afra habegiles." So over here it says, So here it says it depends what the chaff was. If the chaff was dirt, then the dirt is going to fall to the bottom. When we're saying psilus, we're saying the waste. But if the chaff is straw, if the psilus over here is straw, then it's going to float. So in other words, there's two parts. There's two types of dirt that could get mixed into the beans. One, it could be dirt or it could be straw. So if it's the dirt, it goes to the bottom. But over here, it's not saying that there be different types of beans, although there could be. It's saying there's different types of dirt. Okay. That could be a commentary. Beishama Yomrim Mishalchen B'Yomtiv Elamanis. Bishamai says that when you're sending something to your friend, you have to send already prepared food. You can't send. It has to be already prepared. Basil says there's no problem. You can send animals, wild animals, birds, whether it's shechted or not shechted. You can send as a gift. You can send wine and oil and flour and beans. Shalmi has a different mishnayos. Interesting. It leaves out kitnias. Our mishnayos is quoted in the Bavli, but there's a mishnayos from the Yerushalmi that sometimes is different. And they do comparisons with it. Avaloi tvua, but you can't send grain. And the reason why you can't send grain is because you're really not allowed to grind grain on Yom Tov. You could take the thing out of the husk and eat it raw, but you weren't supposed to grind grain. You're allowed to grind spices, crushed spices. But grain was a problem. Reb Shimon Mata B'Tvua. Reb Shimon says that no, you can send grain as well. Why? There is a solution. Maybe he'll cook it with crushing it. We said you can do crushing. You can turn it into a porridge. But it's not going to be a flour, but you can do it and make it as a porridge or something. Tani Rabbi Yechiel, you ever saw this? Rabbi Yechiel? It's the first for me. Rabbi Yechiel taught Vilvajla Yaseno Yeshura. We're talking about sending gifts, that you're allowed to send gifts. You're not allowed to send gifts of one person taking part of it and then another person following behind. I'm imagining like by Yaakov's gifts coming to Esav. What's the problem with that? It looks like everyone is on their way to the marketplace to sell. When you're sending such large amounts, that you're not allowed to do. So, Tana Ein Shura Pchus Mishleisha B'nei Adam. The Brisa says that when we're talking about that, there's a problem to send large amounts of produce to someone else on Yom Tov. That's only if there would be three people, one after another, carrying the produce. Boy Ravashi.
We're still allowed to send a large present.
Yeah, just can't be that it's carried. Ravashi has a question. Plus a gavra, plus a minimum. Let's say it's not the same item. This one's carrying the challah, and this one's carrying the wine, and this one's carrying the fish, dessert or something, because you're going to eat somewhere. Is that a problem? Because it's not like it's a lot that's going to the marketplace. Each one is a different item. Umar says, take it. We leave that as a question. Okay. Reb Shimon Mater B'Tvur. Reb Shimon says you're allowed to send grain. Tanya, Reb Shimon Mater B'Tvur, ben chitin lasim em ludiyos, sha'orin litin lifnei behemtei, adashim lasim em resisim. Reb Shimon says you can send grain. What type of grain? It says it would be like wheat that you can make from it a type of cookie that used the wheat that wasn't ground into flour. Be like an oatmeal cookie. It's not ground into flour. Well, I bet they use flour also in oatmeal cookies, but there's whole pieces there, so that would make sense that you would be allowed to make that on Yom Tov, and that's where you can send it. And the same would be for barley, because barley could be given directly to the animal. And the lentils, you could make also some type of resisin, which is a type of food which is made with lentils. Okay, let's leave it here. Tomorrow morning we'll learn 8:45. If she's not here, I'm assuming that I'll get to the bottom of test of Hamad Beis. All right. 8:45.
We'll
We'll start the new parak. No, the new parak. I'm gonna start tomorrow. Bezras
So
Hashem.
you're gonna start tomorrow,
Yeah.
and you think you get to the bottom of that.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Where did you go until just now?
Uh,